Mabuhay! Hello, my name is Rei Crizaldo and I serve as a Theological Commission Coordinator of the World Evangelical Alliance. Today, I am going to share with you the first of three biblical reflections on the unchanging purpose of God in a changing world. Let me begin by stating the obvious. We live in a world that is on the brink of an overwhelming threat to life on Earth. A threat brought about not only by the possibility of a nuclear devastation, but also by the reality of ecological degradation. As they say, desperate times call for desperate measures. It is no wonder why not a few have been fascinated with the proposal of exploring life elsewhere. That is, should the global climate emergency continue unabated and life on Earth become a more hazardous option, why shouldn't we consider an extraplanetary solution? Elon Musk of Tesla Motors, for example, is trying to develop what is needed to build a colony on planet Mars with his SpaceX project. While it may look like a shot to the moon and beyond, NASA's Perseverance rover did land on Mars in February of 2021, a mission that animated a fresh dose of curiosity towards supporting human life on another planet. A curiosity that is growing among the young generation, as exemplified, for example, by the Korean film Space Sweepers, with the same theme of an abandoned, devastated planet Earth, making it a global hit on Netflix last year. Does our view of Christian mission have anything to say in response to this? Perhaps we can start with the affirmation that the story of God that we will read in the Bible begins with a project of creating a home, a beautiful dwelling place God wanted to share with created beings, human and non-human alike. This is the story that greets us in the opening chapters of Genesis and the same story that closes the final chapters of the book of Revelation. Both stories reveal to us a portrait of a God who has chosen to dwell with all of his creation. If we are to make the starting point of our perspective of Christian mission in God's relentless pursuit of the restoration of all his creation, then our participation in that splendid vision will have to be equally encompassing. This means we are not just to talk about and work for the well-being of people, both in its eternal and temporal dimensions. We also need to look into how people's well-being is closely tied and intertwined with the well-being of the home planet that they inhabit. Somebody gifted my 4-year-old daughter her first Bible. As I was opening its pages with her, there was something that caught my attention. In each illustration, and not just in Isaiah 65, the Bible characters always come alongside spiders, lizards, roosters, butterflies, among many other non-human creatures. Of course, the Bible characters, the animals and the insects, are placed in a tapestry of rivers, trees, and hills, together with Jesus, the apostles, and the Pharisees. The artist of the illustrated Bible has made all of these details not as incidentals to his illustrations, but as an intrinsic part of the Bible stories. It dawned upon me that my daughter was seeing the Bible for the first time, and her recollection of it will be fuller, way fuller, than when I first studied theology many years ago. Looking back, it did take me quite a while to realize that I have been reading my Bible full of people, but empty of everything else that fills the planet. I know I have been trained in the finer points of exegesis and interpretation, but not so much in the discipline of imagination. A terrible handicap, I will say, considering that the Bible is composed mainly of figurative literary forms such as poetry, story, and prophecy. Only a quarter or even less is composed of discourses, arguments. To illustrate by way of proportion, more than half of the Old Testament is poetry, and the Old Testaments make up more than two-thirds of the entire Bible. So, skills of interpretation and interrogation will not be enough to immerse oneself in the storyline of scriptures. This is because the power of stories to transform lies, that the power of stories to transform lies in its invitation to enter a world through creative imagination. A world filled not only with heroes and villains, but with everything else that makes stories meaningful. To open the Bible, therefore, without this prerequisite is to try reading the Chronicles of Narnia. then repeatedly asking whether there is such a being as Mr. Tumnus, or if mice can be knights, such as the valiant Rippichip. So why do we need to bring in imagination as we reflect on what the Bible teaches us about God's unchanging purpose for the world? Firstly, we can read the Bible, mining for proof texts, but merely looking for what is there in the pages, and therefore miss what cannot possibly be absent, even if it is not written. I remember one time I was asked, where in the Bible did Jesus admonish his disciples to plant trees or to care about whales? Another time I was also asked what the church has to do with recycling if its primary calling is evangelism. One can say that a plain reading of the gospel account will tell us that Jesus did not send out his disciples to engage in water conservation or rescue turtles from extinction. But a closer reading will tell us that whenever Jesus explains and teaches about the kingdom of God, he often, almost always, did so by making us think about soil, pearls, lilies, and even moths. There is a deep sense of interconnection of the web of life in the teachings of Jesus. He tells us, for example, in Mark chapter 4, verse 30 to 32, that the kingdom is like a seed that will grow into a tree so big that birds will take shelter in it. Of course, Jesus is not telling us a parable about trees and plants, but if we cannot imagine the kingdom of God with plants and trees, then we fail to grasp the full extent of his reign over the world that he claims to be his. If we cannot imagine a sense of mission, wherein the security and destiny of people is tied to the safety of the planet they are tasked to protect and nurture, as we will read in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, then we fail to grasp the full extent of Jesus' lordship articulated in Matthew chapter 28, verse 18. Today, we've been hearing about clarion calls to expand our notion of mission away from an anthropocentric fixation. This is to allow us to the space to include the non-human members of creation that are also yearning for the glorious wonders of redemption that we read in Romans chapter 8. Evangelicals in particular have begun to talk and embrace a more holistic perspective of mission, or what others call as integral mission. Initially, it meant the recovery of the social dimensions of the gospel. That is, choosing between preaching the good news or the doing of good work is tantamount to actually asking which wing of a bird is more important, the left or the right, to use a metaphor first suggested by Carlos Rene Padilla, a theologian from Ecuador. Later on, the reflections took an even more interesting turn with a call to move away from a paradigm of mission that neglects human beings' relationship with the rest of the created order. And so creation care and climate justice became a part of our missional discourse and engagement. In fact, we now have a Lausanne and WEA joint network on creation care. But let us press the case even further. Is creation limited to what our eyes can see? The beasts, the rivers, and the trees? How about the rest of the non-material creation? The beings that inhabit the realm beyond the natural, or what others call as the supernatural, and in some circles the superstitious. I am referring to the realm of the spirits that communities of old, indigenous people of today, have long acknowledged to be part of the creation that we are called to live in and to live with. Bishop Wayong of Malaysia has often issued a reminder that one of the major handicaps of a Christianity reared in the era and logic of the Enlightenment is the blindness it suffers for the supernatural elements of life. As new centers of Christianity emerge in the majority world, developing a Christian perspective that affirms the invisible world of the spirits is not only important, but also indispensable. So, if we're going to talk about God's unchanging purpose as the reconciliation of all things, then we might as well take with seriousness the hints already provided by Apostle Paul. In his epistle to the believers in Colossae, he wrote about the cross of Christ accomplishing peace in making possible for his Father to reconcile all things back to himself, things visible and things invisible. Colossians chapter 1, verse 20. A portrait of the fullness of this reconciling work demands a biblical imagination that is able to conceive of a kingdom beyond the tangibles of flesh and blood, and able to engage the kingdom of cosmic powers and spiritual forces, as Paul spelled out, for example, in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. There is so much about our planet that we have yet to fully understand, and yet we have often found ourselves in a position of neglect, denial, and God forbid, abandonment. As we reflect on the portraits sketched to us in the first chapters of Genesis, in the final chapters of the book of Revelation, may we imagine God not just as a father calling us to come home, but also as a God who is taking us back to a beautiful home, to a new creation, and together with all created beings that come with it. This, I think, is a starting point for a kind of imagination about a mission that is able to recover the interrelatedness of life in God's home. Thank you so much.